Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ivana. I like to read, and apparently I like to pretend that I also like the winter. Today we're gonna talk about the books that I read in January. I have not been having a good time in the winter. It's not that anything has happened or not happened. The weather hasn't even been particularly bad. It's just a miserable time of year. A trend that I noticed this month is that the books that I'm reading kind of mirror my inner feelings. So we have a mix of books that fed my seasonal blues, books that I tried to use to cure my seasonal blues, and some of these are self-help, which I never read. And we also have books that I read to delude myself into thinking that I was happy. There are 9 books total, and after I share all the books, I'm also gonna share things that have brought me little joys, because we could all use a little bit of joy. So starting with books that fed my seasonal depression. I'm gonna go from most depressing to least depressing, but these are all depressing, these first 3 books. So the first one that I read that was just very, very bleak was PENANCE by Eliza Clarke. This book is about a group of friends that set a girl on fire. They were teenagers. They live in the UK in a seaside town. I got it on audio. I forgot that I had requested it from the library. I got it off of Libby. The book is mixed media. It's a collection of like podcasts, interviews, and also this fictional book that a crooked journalist is writing about the turn of events that led to the murder of this teenage girl. And the first scenes just really rubbed me the wrong way because it's 2 men talking in a podcast and they're saying like these disgusting things about teenage girls. The book also mostly had a male narrator and for some reason I have a hard time with those, but in the end I decided to continue reading because the story was really intriguing and the story was kind of edgy, and the book had a lot to say about girlhood and how dark it can be and how lonely it can be to come of age. I particularly like what one of the characters had to say about being a teen. They said, "There's a bit of you that's always a teenager, isn't there? It's the most traumatic time for loads of people's lives. And even the most healthy and put together adults are still there." And the book has so much to say about bullying and also like the state of the world that we're in the age of technology where you can find anything online. I think the other really great thing about this book is that it has commentary on parasocial relationships, on how people become unhealthily obsessed online. And although online communities can provide people a lot of comfort, they can also serve to just feed into obsessions and unhealthy things. In particular, true crime communities where people pretend to know serial killers, and it's a very like Tumblr-esque book where you see how some of these girls got radicalized online. I feel like I sound like a boomer or a grandma, like being like, be careful of the internet, but that's not what I mean. I just mean that the internet can be a source for good and it can also be a source for just creepy behaviors. The story is very tragic, but it's also very thrilling and mysterious, and you get sucked into these girls' obsessions and you see what creates an environment that can lead to such an atrocious act. The book is really meta. You get to not only read the book that this man is writing, but you also get to see the critiques of it, and it's just really fascinating. It makes me think about true crime and how obsessed we as a society have become with learning more about murders and like the worst day in people's lives. It reminds me of that podcast that's really popular that I don't know if it's still around, but it's My Favorite Murder, and the slogan is "Stay sexy and don't get murdered," which is pretty disrespectful if you think about it. I'm not saying anything groundbreaking. It's just nice to have a book that feeds into that obsession with true crime that also is critiquing it. This book is really special. But I also want to say that you should absolutely check the trigger warnings if you want to read this, because it is very, very sad and violent. I'm gonna leave you with the following quote. "I really think hell is real, but I think we make it. I think people create tiny hells, little pocket dimensions, little hell dimensions. You can physically and literally enter hell." The second depressing book that I read was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacquline Harpman. So this book is really depressing. It is translated from French. It was originally published in 1995 in Belgium, and it tells the story of this woman. We don't know how old she is, but we do know that she is young and she is surrounded by older women. And she and these women, I believe there's like 20 something of them, they're stuck in an underground bunker that is monitored around the clock by a group of men. This woman has no name. She has no recollection of her life before going into this bunker, while the other women do. The other women remember what it's like. like to be out in the world, and the protagonist is just thinking about the meaning of life and what does it mean to exist. I had the privilege of buddy reading this with Kat from Lit with Kat, and we had such a good time on Storygraph, sharing our favorite quotes and reacting to our favorite quotes. I read this on Hoopla, mostly on my computer and my phone, which was a little strange, but there were so many physical holds on this book. The book is short and it has no chapters, and surprisingly, I was really into that format. Normally, I get really anxious when there are no chapter breaks, but for some reason it worked for this one. It was just like a long stream of thought. This book kind of made me feel nostalgic, and even though the premise is super depressing, and this is not a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, the women do end up leaving the bunker and then just trying to figure out what the heck is happening in the outside world. The book reminded me of a Lois Lowry book, like Gathering Blue, which I read in middle school, and it's a dystopia. It gave me this feeling of, damn, I'm reading a classic, and I do think this might be a classic. I just loved the interiority of the main character. I loved all of her thoughts. She muses a lot on what it means to be a human and how people keep their humanity in such inhumane conditions. I can see why the book narration would be a little annoying to some people because it does give away a lot. Like, she'll say, oh, and at that moment we were free, but little did we know X, Y, and Z would happen. And you're just like, wait, what? But I still liked it. I thought it was very well done. The story was really haunting and it will stay with me for a while. I wish I owned this book because I got so much out of it and I would reread it. The last really depressing book that I read was A Separation by Katie Kitamura. I talked about her in my Books for the Winter video. This book was published in 2017 and it follows a woman whose husband has gone missing. She and her husband are, as the title suggests, separated. The woman gets a call from her prissy mother-in-law who's like, hey, like, where is my son? I haven't heard from him in days. Like, I know he's somewhere in Greece. Can you go find him? And so she travels to a remote region in the south of Greece, and she is staying at this resort that is desolate. The land around it is literally on fire. There are wildfires going on in Greece. Even though they're by the coast, it's just a really depressing view. Everything is covered in ash and foggy. Like Intimacies, this book has such a strong sense of place. I could taste the ash in my mouth while I read the book because it was just that immersive. The book is also extremely depressing because, and again, this is not a spoiler, her husband is just a philanderer. He has clearly been with so many women and she's just trying to piece the puzzle together to figure out what happened to him or where he is. The main character also has really interesting observations in what's going on in the world around her, particularly when it comes to the research that her husband is doing surrounding professional mourners in Greece. Morologists, I believe they're called. And so you get to learn a little bit about that. And her interactions with the people in the community are also really interesting. If you didn't know this about me, I like books where people share their intimate thoughts, and there's a lot of that here. I noticed on Goodreads that this had mostly like lukewarm or negative reviews, and a lot of the reviews called this book destinationless. And normally I don't mind if a book is destinationless, but I would say that this book just didn't do it for me, unfortunately, on the whole. It was a little bit too anticlimactic, and it was a little bit too much of a slow burn. And at the end of the story, I just didn't care. But on the bright side, I would definitely read another book by this author. The next section is Cure Me Please. And these are books that I hoped would cure me of my seasonal depression. And the first one is Wintering by Katherine May. This book is all about the power of rest and retreat in difficult times. I have talked about this because it was in my winter TBR. I read this book little by little in the bathtub because it's written in little vignettes. This book is a memoir by a white British woman who received some terrible health news, and she writes about the winters in her life, both like the seasonal winter but also moments of difficulty. She decided one winter to put her life on hold and rest, like she had no choice because she was sick, and she journaled throughout and also did some research. I thought this book was going to be really psychological in terms of like giving you little tidbits of studies that have been done, and there is a little bit of that, but most of it is just her beautiful reflections on this difficult time in her life. She encourages the reader to not resist resist the winters in their lives, but rather to embrace them and just go along with them, because life is really challenging and there will be better days ahead. As cheesy as that sounds. When I think of this book, I will forever think about the hibernating dormouse that she talks about. She writes about how in the winter, animals don't pretend that they're not going through a difficult time. They rest and they prepare for it. And so, like the hibernating dormouse, we should also embrace the darker days and recognize that not every moment in your life is going to be prosperous. I also just love how she talks about different activities that have helped her. She writes about the beneficial effects of swimming in like really cold waters, and she also talks about making sure that you know your limits. She is a woman with autism. She's just like, you know what, I can't handle more than 2 social gatherings a week. That's what I'm gonna limit it to. And that was just like a good reminder for me as someone who tends to overbook herself. This is a good book to read if you totally despise the winter and you want to embrace it more, because things will get better later on, right? On the other hand, one thing that I didn't like about this book is that Katherine May doesn't acknowledge her privilege, or at least I don't remember her doing that. She writes about how she took her son out of school because he was having a hard time, and then she's all like, are there even truancy officers anymore? And it's like, yeah, there are. They're just not after families like yours because you are a professor. But I digress. I think for the most part it was really, really good, and I really recommend this. I am so embarrassed for this next one. I read this one for 3 reasons. 1, it's Kat's Field Notes swears by it, and whenever we talked about anything relating to creativity, she always brought it back to this book. 2, Olivia Rodrigo recommended it in a video that was like my 10 favorite things. I am a 30-something-year-old teenage girl and I can't resist a recommendation from her. She also said that if it wasn't for this book, her first album would not have been made possible, and I love that album. And the 3rd reason is that I wanted to do The Artist's Way, but I just didn't think I would have the time, so I settled for this book. And it is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Creative Living Beyond Fear. This is a book by the author of Eat, Pray, Love. She embraces the fact that she is not everybody's cup of tea. There is big white lady energy in this book, but I got some really good advice from this one. I buddy read this with Kat from Lit with Kat. We are on a buddy reading streak, and it's written in little vignettes. So it's really, really easy to pick up here and there. I managed to also get the audiobook, so I sometimes read it physically, sometimes audiobooked it. Even though I rolled my eyes a lot at some of the things that Lizzie Gill was saying, I did get something out of it. So what did I get out of it? I love the notion that ideas are just floating around waiting for people to pick them up and manifest them. I think it's so kooky, but also just like a fun way of thinking about creativity. I also like what she said about not making your art your primary career, because it sucks the fun out of it and it sucks the creativity out of you when you're doing something and you have to do it for money. She really, really rejects the notion of the tortured artist. She writes about how self-pity slams the door on inspiration, and I love that. Art should be something that gives us life rather than something that we live dread creating. I also love what she has to say about treating art as though it's a lover. You have to make time for your lover, right? Even if it's just in a staircase and it's like a 3-minute makeout session, you gotta make time for your art, baby. And I think what I most love about this is her idea that a good artist is a deeply disciplined half-ass, and how you should just embrace mediocrity. Not everything is going to be amazing, and that's how you get better. It's better to practice your craft and put things out into the world regardless of how good they are, rather than just not putting anything out because you are a perfectionist and nothing is ever good enough, right? Like, how are you ever going to get better if you are not continuing to create art? So this was fun. It was a little bit too long, and I do have a couple gripes with it. The first thing is that she has an apolitical stance on art. Like, the art that you put out there, if you are a person from any marginalized community, is political. Unfortunately, when you are from an underrepresented group, whatever you put out is considered representative of the group of people that you belong to. She claims that we are all living in a safe world, and that is definitely not true for everyone, including people in the United States. Life is harder for certain groups of people. I also feel like her actions recently have contradicted some of the things that she says here. She says you don't have the power to control how people are going to think about your art. And again, I really love that she is so confident in herself that she does not care. She claims to not care about critiques about her work, but she did just write a fiction book set in Russia, and she just decided not to put it out because people were complaining that it was set in Russia and the Russians are attacking Ukraine right now. So I'm not sure what all that is about, but yeah. Overall, it was a fun read. Alright, moving on into books that tricked me into thinking I was happy. The first of these isn't even necessarily a happy book. It is Hit Parade of Tears by Izumi Suzuki. And the reason I picked this up was because I want to read more short story collections. I have a lot of them in my shelves, and this one I had started when I went on the reading retreat with the cats in the summer. And that was such a positive time in my life, so I wanted reminders of that. But this one is actually quite dark, and if you are not familiar with Izumi Suzuki, I've talked about her a little bit. She was a Japanese model, author, and I believe she was a musician. And she was super punk rock. She wrote sci-fi. She unfortunately unalived herself in the mid-80s, and her work is considered pop sci-fi, which I don't know if that's kind of a sexist term because it's like accessible sci-fi. Her work is like really fun and playful. It's also really dark, and it exposes sexism and how useless some men are. This is like a spunky, fun collection of short stories that feature like aliens and things like that. I'm not normally pretentious like this, but I love the fact that I'm reading something that was really popular in Japan but hadn't been translated into English until very recently in the 2020s. So I just wanted to read this. I feel like she's such a fascinating author, and this is her second short story collection, I believe. Her first one is Terminal Boredom, and honestly, I didn't love all the stories here. I think that part of that had to do with the fact that there were 4 different translators for her stories, and so it just felt a little inconsistent. Some of the stories had puns in Japanese in them that were untranslatable, and I thought it was a little uneven. But in spite of everything, I feel like I would absolutely read her first short story collection, and I might actually purchase it. I like reading cool shit. And this was pretty cool. The next book is so cute, and it is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, and I love this short story collection. This follows different people who are trying to find their way in life, and somehow they all end up in the library. They discover their hopes and dreams. They find a way to make it out of their difficult circumstances, like through the power of books, which sounds really nerdy, and connections with other people. I made Dan buy me this for Christmas because I want to read more books with cats on the cover. I honestly think this cover is really cute, but it's kind of giving Canva, which I love Canva, but every story comes with an illustration, and I feel like that illustrator could have made the cover. At first, the stories felt a little simple, and I really like sparse writing, so it didn't bother me. But then as the stories progressed, I was so amazed at the depth of the stories later on. I definitely shed a few happy tears. It just reminded me of Chicken Soup for the Soul, but like elevated. Like Hit Parade of Tears, this was also originally written in Japanese, and what I liked about this book was what it had to say about the power of libraries and the people who run them, how awesome books are. Thoughts about aging, career changing, the power of connections with other people, belonging, and seeking out new experiences. And even though at this point it's February, I don't remember a lot of the stories, I still feel like they truly touched me, and I cannot wait to reread this. If you are looking for a pick-me-up or something to lift your spirits, I highly recommend this one. I also heard that it's better than Before the Coffee Gets Cold, but I could be wrong because I haven't read it. The next book I read was Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I already read this with Monica from Dog-Eared Musings, and we both thought the book was really adorable. We've had a lot of misses with the YA books that we have read. This is a fantasy book. Again, I needed escape and I needed something in my ear while I endured the horrors of the MBTA, aka the public transit system in Boston. This really made me so happy. It's a book about a princess who is really naive, but also very adventurous, who may or may not have magical powers. She has 6 brothers that she loves very much, and a paper bird that is like the cutest thing ever that follows her around. And she befriends a dragon. So she and her brothers are cursed. Part of her curse is that she can't utter a word, because for every word she speaks, one of her brothers will die. Her brothers have been turned into cranes. She also is stuck with a bowl on top of her head. You just get to see how she grows into her own, how she's able to be brave and do things for her family. It's just really, really cute, and there's a cute romance, and so that was just a fun little book that I read. The last book that I read that also lifted my spirits was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I like to talk a lot of shit about how I don't buy books full price, but I bought this baby full price. One thing I found out about myself is that I tend to impulsively buy cozy books that I feel won't be like too sweet and that will make me happy. This fit the bill, and it came to me in a time of need. And it follows a curmudgeonly professor named Emily Wilde, who goes to this fictional Icelandic town in the wintertime to study fairies and to finish up her book that is an encyclopedia of fairies. She has a really hard time connecting with the townsfolk because she is just so awkward and really doesn't like people. And her academic rival slash BFF, Wendell, who is very, very mysterious but also very charming, decides to join her and help her out. The whole book is written in journal entries, written mostly by Emily herself. It's a very, very slice of life book. A lot of things do happen that are adventurous, and there are definitely high stakes in certain parts of the book, but a lot of it is just her and Wendell hanging out in the town. Like, they're complete opposites. Like, Wendell likes to nest and make things really beautiful around the house and make everything homey and like talk to the locals, and she's just like, can we just get to the research part? It was a fun time. It took me a little bit longer than I expected to read it. It's like 330 something pages, but it was just a really like soothing book with a dash of romance. I can't wait to read the sequel. I don't want to pay full price for it, so I'm waiting for my library hold, but Lord knows when that's coming. So yeah, this was just like a happy read in a moment of need, and it really did help me with my seasonal blues. So now we're gonna talk about little joys of January. I wanted to add this section because I really like lists, and I also like to share things that make me happy. And one of the things that made me happy in January was buying this little printer. This is not sponsored, I wish. This is the Canon IV2. It prints stickers from pictures on your phone, and you can customize these stickers. You can make collages. That brings me to another little joy, which is my new reading journal, and look at that. I was able to print a teeny tiny sticker of all of the titles that I read. This was highly inspired by both Cup of Nicole and Cat's Field Notes. I was able to print a bigger picture of a hibernating dormouse to complement what I reflected on in the journal. These little things like stickers and stuff make journaling a lot more fun, and I have been keeping up with this journal, so I'm really excited. I'm still going to use Storygraph for notes, but I will hopefully continue to pick this up. Another little joy in my life are these giant oranges, which are sumo oranges, and they have another name. I'm gonna put it over here. And they're just so delicious, and I love to refrigerate them and have them as a snack. I'm just so happy it is orange season. I got a farmer's market calendar, and it tells me what is in season, and it's very helpful. The last little joy I want to talk about is Cecilia from Svalbard. I love her channel. I had followed her on TikTok, but I love her long form content. She lives in an island close to the North Pole, and she shares all of her adventures there, as well as like little things that she does in her everyday. She's really been my comfort channel. I love watching her videos Saturday nights and like cozying up with like some hot cocoa, and something about her just fills me with joy. So that's it. These are the books that I read in January. I'm still not okay. I don't want to go outside. I want to just fast forward to the spring, but you know, we try. Hopefully better days are ahead. Let me know if you have read any of these books or how your reading is going. I love to chat in the comments, and I hope you're having a lovely time. Peace. I think I look cute. I hope I do. Woo!